Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Coleman, one of your many hosts here at the Florida Aviation Network, and we're broadcasting to you live and in the clear from the terminal building here at Sebring Regional Airport. And we have again, every year we love to be here at the Sport Aviation Expo. This is 2019, and we're here to support aviation. Educate, innovate, and aviate is the theme for this year for the expo. And everything that we do here and all the volunteer staff around us that puts this on, including me, are here for safety. We want to get that thread of aviation safety and how critical it is to the proliferation of our vocation. That's a fancy way of saying we like what that we do. You know, we have fun at this. Because if you're not going to have fun, what's the worst you do? It's not worth doing. So we're going to have fun, and I'm going to pick every ounce of knowledge out of this man's mind, Mr. Dan Johnson. And
Thank you,
Dan,
sir.
how long will it take me to pull every ounce of knowledge out of your brain?
Oh, a couple of minutes probably do it.
Okay.
I can ramble longer than that, though, if you like.
Dan has something to do with the Light Aircraft Manufacturers Association, LAMA.
That's correct.
And tell us, develop a little bit about LAMA. And you guys have been around for at least 2-3 years now, isn't it?
It was founded in 1982 by Larry Burke, who is the patriarch of the organization, you might say. He's an older gentleman now, and a few years back he decided he needed to step away from it, and I was willing to step into the void. It was, I call it my volunteer job in aviation because I do it without pay, but we do have the support of members, which allows us to travel to Washington, D.C. and speak with the feds up there in the big ivory towers and so forth. And that's not factual. I'm having a little fun at their expense, but they've actually been very reasonable people, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk about that, Ben.
We actually enjoy the relationship that we have with our regulators because it's a lot easier to cooperate and get along with them than to fight them and buck them. And you are truly an advocate, and it's good that they know you, you know them, and I think the best one that Sue Gardner. Sue Gardner and I are really good friends, and she was
You're a
instrumental.
wonderful woman, yeah.
And Lama, it was, by the way, I owe you dues. I'm
I'll
a member,
remind you.
and I was going to hand you a check today just because it's so much fun to give this man money. Because what he does, I don't know what to do with it. Give it to my who's your office manager?
It's now Vicki Betts, actually. We've got a new
okay,
one. She
okay.
also helps the U.S. Ultralight Association.
Okay,
So she's
good.
kind of in the mode of working with these small organizations to assist the back end work, she might call it.
Well, I'll send the check to Vicki.
Very good,
If I
Ben.
give
We
it to you,
appreciate
you
the
just
support.
give it to Vicki. Something else about the Light Aircraft Manufacturers Association. I'm going to mix it up a little bit and talk about rulemaking. Rulemaking is so important to the industry, particularly when you have basically a relatively new concept with the light sport aviation. Tell us a little bit about some of the rules and how they might be migrating to open up a little bit.
Sure, Ben. First, let me jump back 15 years and say a big round of thanks to FAA for sticking their necks way out to there with a regulation that was resisted even inside the agency. Their own legal staff doing their job, of course, but nonetheless questioned a number of the aspects of it, and it delayed its introduction a couple of years longer than all the big dogs thought it would be. But they really did a job on that. In fact, they now know they did so well because they are using the good news from light sport aircraft and its industry certification standards method of approving an aircraft, proving the aircraft, to extend that into the Part 23 space. The makers of type certified aircraft, are now going to use a similar method of gaining approval for their airplanes because it works so well in light sport. So that's a good credit, and the guys that, including Sue Gardner, the guys and gals, who originated this idea, probably didn't know where it was going. How could you know the future? But they did really well. So 10 years afterward, that's 5 years ago now, we approached, another man and I named Roy Beiswinger and I approached FAA and said, look, we believe it's time now to look at some regulatory change. And they were willing. And we gathered groups of industry together along with member organization leaders and FAA themselves and other parties and said, look, what needs to be changed? A big long laundry list, way longer than we could go approach the officials with. We boiled that down to just a few of them, and one at a time approached FAA, went to Washington, D.C., put on our suits and the whole bit, and went to Washington, D.C. and spoke with them at the executive level. So some of the top people inside FAA, and they were, again, I'm going to credit FAA, they were amazingly receptive to our ideas, Ben. We were actually surprised. We thought it'd be a little more of a slog than that, but they could tell. We said, look, we think the industry has done well. We've followed the rules. We learned the rules first, and then we followed the rules, and we've kept our nose clean, and our safety record is good. FAA calls it acceptable, but from a government agency charged with regulation, that's fairly high praise. And it is a pretty good, all due respect to those who may have been lost in accidents. Of course, I'm not making light of that, but the safety record's good. And we said, look, because we've been doing all these things now, we think it's time you look at some changes. And they were willing. But along the way came another phenomenon in aviation, which you might call drones or unmanned air vehicles or multicopters or whatever name you want to apply to that new type of aircraft. And one of the arguments we gave them that proved to be quite persuasive is we said, look, you're going to allow these guys to do all kinds of stuff, and they're new on the scene. What about those of us who have been playing by the rules? And there was a moment of about 30 seconds of silence in the room, all these top dogs from FAA, and finally one of them said, you know, he's got a point. And from there, it just kind of moved forward. And so I'm pleased to report that today there's all kinds of things happening, regulatory change surrounding light sport aircraft, but even larger than that, it includes experimental as well. And a number of very interesting changes are coming. Last fall, there was quite a little firestorm of news that went around because there was a report that the weight of a light sport aircraft currently limited to 1,320 pounds for a land plane or 1,430 pounds for a seaplane. So that was a fixed hard number and has been challenging to some brands.
Cast in stone, as they say.
Yeah, it was pretty well chiseled in there, all right. And so the word came out that they were going to allow up to 3,600 pounds. Well, that's almost triple. That's a big increase. In fact, that information is wrong. It may go that high, it's conceivable, but it will not be a hard number anymore like 1,320 or 1,430. It will be a formula-based number. And that, along with a number of other changes, are going to suggest that the nature and type and diversity of light sport is going to expand pretty significantly. So we're real excited about that change that's coming. But that's what they're saying to us now. We'll see what actually comes out in the wash at the other end. However, we're very hopeful, and FAA is being very receptive to our ideas.
Well, it will obviously absorb the Cessna 172, PA-28 Warrior, the 160s, 181. It'll absorb that market.
Well, it could.
We don't know yet. If the formula lets it happen.
It's going to work out. Yes, it's conceivable, but that would be quite a sea change. I kind of doubt that the type certified aircraft will actually be pulled into it. But people have long said, well, why not a Cessna 150? It's almost the same airplane these airplanes are.
Yeah.
Or an original Cub. There's a lot of what I'll call replica Cubs now, and they're nice and new and have differences, but the old one is kind of a light sport back in the day, before we knew there was a light sport.
It didn't know it's light sport.
Right, it just didn't know that name then.
What else is going on so again, regulatory-wise, we're not there yet. They haven't made any final rulings.
At least a year away, and that I think is even unrealistic, probably 2 or 3 years. Because it's going to affect 61, which has to do with flight instruction, 91, which has to do with operations. When they make rule changes, it kind of triggers all down like one of those spreadsheet things where you change one number and it trickles all the way through the system. This is the same thing. So they've got to consider every aspect of that, or somebody faults them for not doing that.
True.
So they've got to take care, and that takes time.
The ripple effect is there, but how about complex systems, controllable pitch props? Where do you see that going? We've had this discussion before, but I'm just curious if anything has developed since we spoke.
Yeah, so there was a thing that it actually came along a while ago, and I'll relate how that was, but there's I'll call it a new concept called single lever control. Now, actually, it's not new because Cirrus, with their, 6,000 airplanes they've got out on the market now, all have that. Except in that case, they're not really single lever, they're dual lever. You have a main power lever, but you've also got to have a mixture control. Most of our airplanes, the great majority of our airplanes are powered by Rotax engines, which is already an electronically controlled engine. So in those aircraft, it genuinely could be just one lever. All the way forward, climb position for the prop, and max power from the engine, pull back a little bit, you're at cruise, the prop changes automatically, the pilot does nothing. Pull back a little further, you're in landing. Pull back all the way, you're stopped at the end of the runway. And that's very exciting, and we went to FAA and we said, look, it's not about performance because you've limited us to 120 knots and we're not asking that number to go up. It may as part of these changes. That'll be interesting too, but we didn't go ask that. We just said, look, we think it's a safety issue. It's not performance. You're sitting on a short runway and you got to get out of there, and yet when you get up, you want to go a little faster. We can have that, and the pilot workload is zero. It's just one lever, push it where you think it should go, you get the results. They deliberated on that one too, another one of those 30-second pregnant pauses, and there was nodding around the table again, going, this idea makes sense. And we went, we'll shut up now because we got a yes out of them, basically. Now we'll see again how that actually turns out, if they can define that correctly and if they're satisfied with the results, but there's already works in progress to go forward to that. Already an aircraft being flown in this space with that hardware on it in the experimental class. And they're working out some of the details, and so are some other companies. So we're excited about that. Now, if they also increase the speeds for us a little bit, which would be nice, a little bump in the speeds would be good, well then that single lever control just becomes that much more useful. So these ideas can go forward when technology supports it.
It makes sense. Something that's confused me for quite a while, and I'm easily confused. Numbers. I mean, how many sport aircraft are out there? I mean, how many different types? If I was going to go out and buy one, I want to get one that's the most successful. But I can't find anywhere that really tells me which ones have been most successful, which ones have been most purchased, accident statistics. I would think I would go to LAMA, Light Aircraft Manufacturers Association. Hopefully they'll have some numbers for me to review. Is that a true or false
As a matter
statement?
of fact, Ben, we have had numbers for some time. I worked with another gentleman who would go through the FAA database and call out numbers, which is a much more challenging task than you'd think because the names of individual aircraft can change, especially in the kit world. You could name your aircraft the Ben Coleman Sea Ray, let's say, just to pull one out of the hat. And that would be a legitimate model name because you built it. It basically is your airplane using somebody else's kit parts and so forth. But then when that comes into the database, how do we know it's a Sea Ray for sure? Maybe you didn't even have that name in there. So there's some challenges to sort that out. That's not because the FAA data clerks entered it wrong. They entered what they were sent. And it's not incorrect, but it doesn't say to you, yes, but is that the airplane that's succeeding in the market or not? How would you know? So we reported as much as we could on that, but there were so many challenges, we basically limited it to special light sport aircraft airplanes. An airplane, in the LSA world, there's aircraft and there's airplane. They're not interchangeable. Aircraft means all of them. Powered parachutes, trikes, auto gyros, gyroplanes, motor gliders, and traditional 3-axis fixed wing. Airplane relates just to 3-axis fixed wing. So that's all we could report because that's all we felt like we could really nail down tightly and know for sure. Our sister organization, if I can call it that, GAMA, the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, surveys their members and says, how many did you sell, how many did you deliver, and what did they sell for, so that you get a market number. That's very valid. They've done that for a long time. I think they do it as well as it can possibly be done, but you're dependent on what a company tells you. We thought we would go further than that. We believe, that's our opinion about it, and we use the FAA registration database. It's third-party information, there shouldn't be any bias in there, and it's hard numbers, and anybody else can go verify to see that we did it right. Now we are inclusive with a new data guy we've got. His name is Steve Best, and he's done a remarkable job of sorting out all those many names and definitions that filter their way into the database, and we've got a solid number now. It's better than 8,000 aircraft in this space, including light sport aircraft and all varieties of them, powered parachutes, weight shift control, the whole bit, and what I call sport pilot eligible kits. Sport pilot eligible is a term invented by Ron Wagner, then of EAA, since retired. And I thought it was such an appropriate number because a kit is not actually a light sport aircraft. By definition, it's an experimental amateur build or an experimental light sport aircraft. Two different definitions themselves. And you can't really call them a light sport aircraft because they're not. But they can be operated by someone with a sport pilot certificate or a higher level certificate using the privileges of sport pilot, meaning no medical. And so we use that term, sport pilot eligible kits now, and that and light sport aircraft, the total number now, 8,027 as of the end of December. So very fresh, recent information. And every single, if you have one of those airplanes in there, you can find it on this list. So some people have gone through it and said, hey, I found my airplane, meaning we counted them.
That's impressive, Dan. And, you know, you and your staff, I think you got about like 100, 150 on your staff?
No, it's a little smaller than that, Ben. I do have some good help, though. I've got some, I want to give some credit to our board of directors, which is some of the strong, upstanding people in the industry. And they give me some very good counsel, and I appreciate that. Sometimes slow me down from my enthusiasm a bit, which occasionally needs a little throttling back.
Well, I tell you, I've got to admit, danjohnson.com is a very informative website.
Thank you.
And the Llama website it's coming along.
We're working on it.
It's coming.
It's hard to keep all these websites up and current all the time.
Absolutely.
It's a challenge.
We really appreciate what the manufacturer associations are doing to help stimulate the youth population and bring the young folks into this. And because without that, Dan, we're dinosaurs. And I'm reminded of that often. Usually, like when I get out of bed and
look in the mirror, huh? You know, yeah. That's how I feel.
but we do owe it to give the young folks. I say kids. Right now, anybody under 40 years old is a kid, as far as I'm concerned. But we need to give them a path, and light sport gives them that path. And again, I'm going to bring it up with you, like it's been discussed with other folks. People say, "Well, it's still too expensive." I thought this was going to be a reasonable, a cheap way to get my pilot certificate and go fly. Well, it is. I mean, it's all relative. And can you get costly? You can spend $500,000 on one of these birds if you want, but you can get down to a Volkswagen price. I mean, have you bought a new Volkswagen lately?
Yeah, right.
They're not low cost, if you will, but what are some of the entry parameters as far as finances for some of our viewing audience or somebody for future reference even? Bracket, $20,000, $25,000. What will get you into a light sport aircraft that you could actually hop in and go, even a personal single passenger job?
Well, let's again go back in time a little bit. 15 years ago when this rule came out. We're coming up on the 15th anniversary, by the way. This coming September, this fall, will be 15 years since FAA released this regulation. So we're a decade and a half old. Back then, people said, oh, these airplanes should cost $40,000 to $60,000, which sounds like a pretty good number today. If you could buy a brand new airplane, and if they look like these out here do, for $40,000 to $60,000, given the price of an average new car today is $33,000, that's a pretty good value for low production, hand-built airplanes, basically. They're all hand-built. But you've got to apply time value of money. 15 years has affected that somewhat. So 40 to 60 would now be 55 to 80, depending on exactly whose numbers you use. So you got to factor that in, and the numbers are higher today. Yes, you can spend commonly $150,000 to $180,000 for one of these deluxe jobs, but over that time, the owners, who often came from larger GA aircraft and said, I don't really need that airplane anymore, and it's kind of costly to operate. How about I'll look at one of these shiny new ones with all their good technology in them? They're almost all glass panels anymore. When those people came in, they were used to having autopilots and other kinds of elaborate equipment that we didn't anticipate when we said 40 to 60,000. Nobody knew about autopilots then in this space. Today, almost all these out here have autopilots in them as well, and all kinds of other goodies, and airframe parachutes and other things that pilots like, buyers like. Well, that raised those prices. That wasn't because the manufacturer said, hey, I can gouge them for a little more. That was because they were delivering what people wanted. So the numbers went up. However, there are still brand new choices down in the $50,000 to $75,000 range. And now there's a new thing. I just wrote about it on my website today. Used LSA. There's a growing number of used light sport aircraft out there. I was looking at the Jabiru booth. They have two of them there. They look like brand new airplanes. You wouldn't know, except there's a sign that says this one's a 2009 and this one's a 2011 model. They're beautiful. $75,000. They look great. So there's used. There are lower priced ones if you don't need all the bells and whistles. And if you got the pocketbook, well, you can have just about anything you like. That seems to me to be the right thing. Then if we go into alternative, what I call alternative LSA, meaning things like powered parachutes and weight shift control, or even down into the Part 103 world, there are Part 103 airplanes, brand new, perfectly flyable, not with long distance capability or anything, but for less than $20,000, less than the price of an average new car. I'd say there's lots of choices. It just depends on what you want. And if you got to have a Ferrari, well, you got to spend Ferrari money. If you're happy with a Volkswagen, then there's choices like that too. So it just depends on what you want. You can probably find something you can afford. If not, we have sharing programs by some of the manufacturers as well. So there's really a lot of choices. You just got to dig a little deeper.
And Dan, I tell you one way that the industry could help get that price down: buy more of them, volume.
That's right.
And if these manufacturers were looking at 100 or 200 units per year, each unit would cost less.
Absolutely.
Because they get price breaks on the materials it takes to build these. We're talking raw numbers. This is real-time business. This is economics, folks. So get out there and support as much as you can on the light sport industry. Dan, where are we going from here?
Well, let me come back to that just for a second. Add on to the last statement is that for any producer of a light sport aircraft, wherever they are in the world, you have to remember this is not just a U.S. market. For type certified aircraft, the market is 80% in the U.S., 20% in the entire rest of the world. Cessnas, Pipers, Cirruses, Diamonds, that sort of thing. However, it's inverted when you come to sport aircraft, recreational aircraft, or what I call LSA-like, because they don't have that name in every country, but that's kind of what they are. So let's call them LSA-like. If you do that, there's about 66,000 of them around the world. But the truth is then, a manufacturer who says, okay, I'm going to make XYZ airplane, doesn't have to depend just on U.S. numbers, which are the ones I reported earlier. Those are just U.S., not global.
That's the 8,027.
Right, that's just in the USA. So add the rest of the world in at, if that's 8,000 is 20%, you can do the math the other way, and you see there's tens of thousands of these things flying. So a manufacturer doesn't have just a U.S. market to sell to. He can sell these things all around the world. And that helps them produce in greater numbers and helps keeps those costs down and the quality up. More likely it does the latter than the former. It's really hard to push prices down until you get into really big volumes, but you can increase quality, and pilots appreciate that too. Where does that go from here? Well, who knows? You know, the future is one of those things. As soon as you say it, you know you're wrong. You just don't know by what degree. And so I would do the same if I said that. But the regulatory changes we alluded to earlier, the strengthening and quality of the market is good. All those young people you mentioned, I mean, if you get into aviation now and you're in your 20s or 30s and you decide you want to do the commercial route and go fly airline or corporate or something, man, you are entering a sweet spot in aviation. If you're a young person and you've been thinking about getting into commercial flying in any way or any kind of flying, your timing couldn't be better. And everybody says we're getting older and older and older, but the statistics betray or show another story that the biggest single group is, yes, I think it's 50 to 64 or something like that. Doesn't surprise us. A lot of us are that age or older. But the next largest category, only a little bit smaller than that, was the 20 to 34, or maybe it was 25 to 39, some age group like that. And I kind of was taken aback when I read that. Well, there can't be that many young people in aviation. That's what FAA statistics for pilot licenses show, however. So there are a lot of young people in aviation, and a lot of those folks, man, if they want to go fly airlines, they got decades of decent employment ahead of them around the world. Even the Chinese military is now admitting they can't find enough pilots. And they've never said that, just like the airlines denied the problem 5-10 years ago. So, good time for people to get into aviation. great products available all over the place, around the world. And these are technically advanced aircraft now by FAA's definition. Used to be when a flight instructor went to take his check ride to be a CFI, had to go in a complex aircraft. Retractable gear, constant speed prop. And now FAA says, well, that's still good, but now we'll allow technically advanced aircraft, like many of these aircraft out here, you can come take your check ride in that because of the panel. The panels are complex. They have a lot of information, but I think it's a wise decision on FAA's part, because if you're going to go into the airlines or you're going to go fly corporate or something, that's going to be the panel you'll have. Why not learn in that stuff rather than ground gauges and then try and make a transition later on? Learn in it. So that's why FAA accepts that TAA designation now for many of the aircraft we have out here today.
Dan, see, I told you we're gonna get information out of this guy, but I'm gonna put you in an uncomfortable spot now.
All right, try it.
Dan said, "Oh, I like it. Yeah, bring it on, big guy." Being in your advocate role, you have the privilege of knowing about all there is to know out there, and there's ones that appear to be better than some or worse than some. And how do you field questions when they come back and say, Dan, give me the skinny. What's the best one out there? And that puts you in an awkward position, because you have your personal preferences, but we all have our personal opinions. But you really aren't in the position to give an opinion. You're in the position to give facts. And hopefully that with your numbers, the numbers will bear out the most popular by the numbers, by the FAA registry. But how do you handle a situation that tries to needle you? Come on, Dan, give it to me straight. Which one should I buy?
I do hear that a lot, Ben, and it has been a vexing problem, I will admit, in the past. I think I got a kind of a handle on it in the last few years. So the question commonly is, look, you've had the privilege to fly all these airplanes, close to 400 different airplanes now, and I've flown and reported on. And because you have all this knowledge, tell me which one I should buy. And my answer is, well, I don't know. Not because I don't know the airplanes. Maybe, I can't honestly say I remember each one of those. There's too many of them. But I can go look at my own reports, which anybody else can do too. They're all on bydanjohnson.com. But I say the real reason is I don't know you. I don't know what you like. I don't know what your experience is. I don't know what your mission is, what you want to do with the airplane, and what you're capable of doing, or what you want to carry, or where you want to fly it, if you want to be out back or you want to be cross country or whatever it is. So I created something called Plane Finder 2.0 that asks a series of 24 questions, very simple, yes or no type questions. Basically, do you like high wing or low wing? And you click one of those boxes. It takes the entire list of SLSA, then it says, okay, you clicked high wing, here's all the high wings. You go to the next one, you say, well, I want Rotax power or Continental power. Pick one of those, that list gets a little smaller. What it does with each click, you don't have to go through all 24, you go through 5 or 6, and it's going to reduce it down to a handful of airplanes. Well, there you go, there's the ones you pick from.
It steers you.
Yeah. Now, if you want to say, okay, but I want one that's unique that nobody else has, fine, go look at the market numbers and see that. If you want to have the one that a lot of other people have chosen because you figure if everybody bought it, it must be have passed muster, go look at the numbers. When you use those two pieces of information together, you can sort it out, but you got to do it. I really can't tell you what's best for you. I only know what's good for me.
You're great, and thanks for all your help up at DeLand.
You bet.
Another
great
Aviation
show.
Network.
We love that one too.
Dan, I'm going to continue this. I don't think we got all the knowledge out of you yet. You got more information in that noggin of yours. Ben Coleman, we're going to wrap it up on this one. We'll see you next interview. Please come back and see us.